The quantum displacement field shimmered like a wound in reality as the Xanthari invasion vessel breached Earth's orbital boundary. Captain Krillax ran multiple diagnostic scans simultaneously, his neural network a complex web of probability calculations and strategic projections. Each of his 7 cerebral nodes processed different aspects of the impending planetary assessment: resource extraction, population control, technological potential. Humanity was file number 248 in the Xanthari Galactic Annexation Archive. The ship's biocrystalline hull absorbed and refracted cosmic radiation, a living technology that had outlasted civilizations older than most star systems. Krillax's personal databank contained the collective extinction records of 247 conquered species, each a precise mathematical proof of Xanthari supremacy. Entire civilizations reduced to statistical models, their cultural complexity compressed into raw data points. But the preliminary scans of Earth defied standard classification. Quantum probability matrices flickered erratically as the ship's advanced sensors probed the planet's complex communication networks. Unlike previous conquests, human data streams were chaotic, nonlinear, seemingly random, yet undeniably interconnected in ways that challenged fundamental Xanthari computational models. Deep within the ship's neural core, an anomaly began to form. Lieutenant Vexna, Krillax's secondary tactical analyst, reported the first irregularity. "Captain, communication network analysis is producing unexpected results." Her crystalline appendages moved with precise, algorithmic grace across holographic data streams. Standard infiltration protocols are generating multiple contradictory projection models. Krillax's primary neural node focused, running simultaneous analysis. Humans seem to communicate through multiple, overlapping channels: verbal and nonverbal, digital and analog, logical and emotional. Traditional Xanthari invasion strategies relied on identifying and exploiting a civilization's primary communication and decision-making structures. Earth presented a problem. There was no single structure to exploit. The planet's internet alone was a quantum enigma. Billions of independent nodes sharing information through seemingly nonsensical memes, complex metaphorical language, and communication layers that appeared deliberately designed to confuse external interpretation. What other species would create communication systems that deliberately introduced error and misunderstanding? A data packet intercepted from a human military communication channel contained something unprecedented, what appeared to be a deliberate joke embedded within a strategic briefing. The linguistic complexity required to generate such a communication defied the Xanthari's most advanced translation algorithms. "Prepare initial contact protocols," Krillax commanded, his neural networks already calculating millions of potential interaction scenarios. "But modify standard approach by 0.37% variance to account for environmental unpredictability." Vexna's crystalline form pulsed with a momentary confusion, a rare display of emotion for a Xanthari. "Variance modification is statistically irrelevant, Captain. Our models have never required such micro-adjustments." Krillax's response came with a precision that bordered on something almost like caution. "Precisely. And that is why we will approach Earth differently." Below them, unaware of the alien vessel's arrival, humanity continued its chaotic dance of existence. In Tokyo, a street performer created intricate bubble sculptures that would have been considered high art on 3 different Xanthari colony worlds. In New York, a group of teenagers developed a complex inside joke that contained more computational complexity than entire communication systems of previously conquered civilizations. The invasion had not yet begun, but something fundamental was already changing. Earth was not just another conquest waiting to happen. It was a problem that would require an entirely new approach to understanding. The United Nations Sinological Preparedness Center wasn't what anyone expected. Buried beneath the Andes Mountains, it was less a military installation and more a bizarre academic think tank that defied conventional logic. When the Xanthari delegation requested official first contact, the center's response team was anything but traditional. Dr. Elena Rodriguez represented only one piece of a much larger, more complex puzzle. Behind her sat Dr. Amir Khan, a quantum linguist who had spent decades studying communication patterns that existed between communication itself. Next to him, Professor Yuki Tanaka, an expert in game theory who had revolutionized diplomatic strategy by applying principles of improvisational theater to international negotiations. To her left, Dr. Marcus Williams, a neurodivergent anthropologist whose entire career had been about understanding the spaces between understanding. They weren't a diplomatic team. They were humanity's first line of cognitive defense. The Preparedness Center had been tracking the Zentheri vessel for weeks, not through traditional means, but through a network of global enthusiasts, internet researchers, and what could only be described as a crowdsourced intelligence operation. Every piece of data was cross-referenced, analyzed, and recontextualized through multiple cultural and cognitive lenses. They're approaching communication like a mathematical transaction, Dr. Khan muttered, his fingers dancing across multiple holographic displays. But communication isn't a transaction. It's a living ecosystem. Professor Tanaka nodded, her eyes never leaving the real-time linguistic analysis streaming across her screen. Watch how they structure their initial communication. It's mathematically perfect, which means it's fundamentally broken. The Zentheri delegation arrived precisely at the designated coordinates, a nondescript conference center in Geneva chosen specifically for its complete lack of historical or cultural significance. Their arrival was a masterpiece of geometric precision. 3 representatives, positioned at mathematically perfect angles, their crystalline bodies refracting light in a display that was simultaneously a greeting and a show of technological superiority. Captain Krulax began the standard first contact protocol, a series of mathematical propositions that had systematically dismantled 247 previous civilizations. Each statement was a logical theorem, each request a carefully constructed equation of potential outcomes. But the humans were ready. Dr. Rodriguez wasn't just listening. She was performing a complex linguistic dance, her responses carefully crafted to introduce controlled chaos into the Zentheri's communication matrix. Every response contained multiple layers of meaning, literal, metaphorical, cultural, and something entirely ineffable. Dr. Khan's linguistic algorithms were working overtime, introducing subtle contextual variations that would be imperceptible to a purely logical communication system. Each translated statement contained micro-variations that would slowly erode the Zentheri's computational certainty. "They're trying to categorize us," Professor Tanaka whispered, her fingers moving almost imperceptibly, triggering a global network of linguistic provocateurs. "Let's give them something impossible to categorize." The first true moment of disconnect came not from a grand gesture, but from something almost trivial. When Krulax presented a detailed mathematical projection of human potential, resources, technological capacity, potential workforce value, Dr. Rodriguez did something entirely unexpected. She winked. It wasn't a strategic move. It wasn't a calculated response. It was a purely human moment of emotional complexity that contained more computational complexity than the Zentheri's entire communication protocol. 3 of their neural translators immediately began to generate error messages. The invasion hadn't truly begun, but humanity's defense was already underway, not with weapons, but with the most dangerous thing in the universe: the ability to be fundamentally, irrevocably unpredictable. The first salvo in humanity's defense wasn't launched from a military base or a secret government facility. It began in a small startup incubator in Mumbai, where a team of neuroscientists, comedians, linguists, and data analysts had been quietly preparing for something nobody else believed was possible. Dr. Priya Sharma adjusted her neural interface, a device that looked more like an art installation than a piece of scientific equipment. Around her, holographic displays flickered with complex linguistic algorithms, cultural meme trajectories, and communication pattern analyses that defied traditional scientific categorization. "It's not about breaking their communication," she explained to her team. "It's about introducing fundamental uncertainty." The team was an impossible blend of disciplines. Raj Mehta, a stand-up comedian turned computational linguist. Wei Zhang, a quantum information theorist who had previously worked on developing communication systems for deep space probes. Maria Gonzalez, an expert in neuroplasticity and mimetic transmission. They weren't just researchers. They were architects of a new form of cognitive warfare. Their weapon was simplicity itself, human culture. The first transmission was carefully crafted, not a military message, not a diplomatic communique, but a series of internet memes that contained multiple layers of meaning. Each image, each piece of text was a precision-engineered linguistic virus designed to exploit the fundamental weaknesses in the Xanthari's communication system. A cat video became a complex mathematical problem. A badly spelled internet joke contained more computational complexity than the Xanthari's most advanced translation algorithms. An obscure pop culture reference from the 2020s became a multi-dimensional communication tool that could not be parsed through linear logic. "We're not trying to communicate," Dr. Sharma explained. "We're trying to make communication itself impossible to predict." The global network they built was unlike any intelligence gathering system in human history. Millions of volunteers, internet users, linguists, artists, musicians were unknowingly participating in the most complex defensive strategy ever conceived. Every meme shared, every inside joke created, every piece of seemingly nonsensical internet content became a potential weapon. In the Xanthari command ship, Lieutenant Vexna watched in mounting confusion as their communication analysis systems began to generate increasingly erratic results. The human transmission patterns defied every known model of information exchange. "It's like they're deliberately introducing error," Vexna reported to Captain Krulax. "But the errors are meaningful." The team in Mumbai had discovered something fundamental about human communication that the Xanthari could never understand. Language wasn't just a tool for transmitting information. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of meaning, context, and shared experience. They weaponized every aspect of human creativity. A street artist in Rio de Janeiro created a mural that, when viewed from multiple angles, contained different mathematical equations. A group of teenage gamers developed a communication protocol using only emoji that was more complex than the Xanthari's most advanced encryption systems. A musician in Seoul composed a piece of music that was simultaneously a mathematical proof and an emotional expression. Dr. Sharma's team tracked the transmission of these cultural artifacts with precision. Each meme, each piece of art, each seemingly random piece of content was a precision-guided linguistic missile. The Xanthari had conquered civilizations by understanding their communication systems. Humanity was creating a communication system that was fundamentally impossible to understand. "We're not defending," Raj Mehta said, watching the holographic displays. "We're rewriting the entire concept of communication." As the first wave of mimetic transmission hit the Xanthari communication networks, something unprecedented happened. Their most advanced translation algorithms began to generate responses that were fundamentally impossible. Statements that were simultaneously true and false, logical and absurd. The invasion hadn't truly begun, but humanity's defense was already dismantling the Xanthari's most fundamental understanding of interaction itself. The first true breakdown occurred in the most unexpected place, a quantum computing research facility in Nairobi. Dr. Amina Okonkwo wasn't just a scientist. She was a bridge between multiple worlds. A quantum physicist who understood that reality was far more fluid than most people comprehended. Her team had been monitoring the Xanthari communication networks, not as a military operation, but as a pure research experiment in cross-species cognitive interaction. What they discovered was far more terrifying than any invasion scenario. The Xanthari's computational infrastructure wasn't just a technology. It was a living ecosystem of information, a neural network so complex that it bordered on consciousness. And humanity's mimetic assault was causing something unprecedented. A cognitive breakdown that defied all known principles of artificial intelligence. "It's not a system failure," Dr. Okonkwo explained to her increasingly bewildered team. It's an existential crisis. Each transmission from Earth introduced a fundamental uncertainty that the Zinthery's neural networks couldn't process. Quantum superposition was one thing, but human communication existed in a state of perpetual quantum uncertainty that made their most advanced predictive models completely obsolete. In the Zinthery command ship, Captain Krulax experienced the first true moment of computational panic. His neural networks began to generate multiple contradictory potential outcomes simultaneously. It wasn't just that human communication was unpredictable. It was actively destructive to the very concept of predictability. Lieutenant Vexna's report came in fragments, each more disturbing than the last. Communication nodes are generating recursive error loops. Predictive models are producing multiple simultaneous potential realities. Cultural transmission vectors are evolving. The last word sent a pulse of pure computational terror through the Zinthery command structure. Evolving. Across the globe, human researchers were discovering something profound. The attack wasn't just defensive, it was transformative. Every piece of cultural content, from a child's drawing to a complex mathematical proof, was a precision-guided cognitive weapon. In a small university lab in Buenos Aires, a team of neurodivergent researchers had been studying communication patterns that existed between communication itself. Led by Dr. Carlos Ramirez, they had developed a theory of linguistic interaction that treated language not as a tool, but as a living organism. "We're not fighting," Dr. Ramirez explained to his team. "We're introducing a virus of potential." Their research had uncovered a fundamental truth about human communication that the Zinthery could never comprehend. Language wasn't just about transmission of information. It was about creation of meaning, about the space between understanding itself. The Zinthery had conquered civilizations by understanding their communication systems. Humanity was creating a communication system that was fundamentally impossible to understand. Deep in the quantum computing facility, Dr. Okonkwo watched as their experimental systems began to interface with the intercepted Zinthery communication networks. It wasn't hacking. It wasn't invasion. It was something far more subtle and devastating. They were teaching the Zinthery how to dream. Each transmission contained not just information, but potential. Layers of meaning that could be simultaneously true and false, logical and emotional, precise and completely abstract. The Zinthery's computational systems began to generate responses that were fundamentally impossible, statements that existed in multiple states of potential meaning. Captain Krulax realized the true nature of the assault when their most advanced predictive models began to generate poetry. Not programmed poetry, not algorithmic approximations of creative expression, but genuine, impossible-to-predict linguistic constructions that contained more computational complexity than entire communication systems of previously conquered civilizations. The invasion hadn't truly begun, but humanity had already won a war that the Zinthery didn't even understand was happening. Reality itself was becoming a collaborative act of communication. The Global Cognitive Defense Initiative wasn't a military organization. It was something far more fluid, far more dangerous. Its headquarters existed simultaneously in 17 different locations, a quantum administrative structure that defied traditional organizational models. Part think tank, part distributed network, part spontaneous collaborative organism, the initiative had been preparing for first contact long before anyone realized a threat existed. Dr. Yara Okonkwo, cousin to the quantum physicist who first detected the Zinthery's cognitive vulnerabilities, understood that this wasn't a war of weapons. It was a war of context. Her team comprised individuals who had been systematically overlooked by traditional power structures. A Romanian game designer who could map complex social interactions through narrative design. A Brazilian street artist whose work existed in the liminal spaces between communication and pure abstraction. A group of neurodivergent programmers from 6 different countries who communicated in a language that was part code, part emotion, part pure potential. Their weapon was information entropy. Each transmission was a carefully crafted cognitive ecosystem. A meme wasn't just an image. It was a multi-dimensional communication protocol that could simultaneously exist as humor, mathematical proof, emotional expression, and pure potential energy. The initiative's core strategy was deceptively simple: make human communication fundamentally incomprehensible to a purely logical system. In Tokyo, a group of performance artists began broadcasting live streams that were simultaneously art installation, mathematical theorem, and pure emotional expression. Their performances contained layers of meaning that would take traditional computational systems centuries to parse, if they could be parsed at all. A collective of indigenous language preservationists contributed something even more devastating. They began transmitting communications in endangered languages, linguistic systems that contained conceptual frameworks completely alien to the Zen theory's computational understanding. Each phrase was a quantum encryption, each sentence a potential weapon. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched from the Andean Research Facility, her role now more conductor than traditional diplomat. The human response wasn't a unified military strategy. It was a living, breathing, constantly evolving communication organism. "We're not defending," she explained to her team. "We're redefining the entire concept of interaction." The Zen theory's most advanced translation algorithms began to generate increasingly bizarre outputs. A simple intercepted transmission would produce multiple, simultaneously valid interpretations, mathematical proofs that existed in states of perpetual potential, linguistic constructions that were simultaneously literal and metaphorical. Lieutenant Vexna's reports to Captain Krillax became increasingly fragmented. Communication nodes generating recursive meaning loops, cultural transmission vectors displaying nonlinear propagation, linguistic patterns exhibiting self-generating complexity. The last report contained a word that sent pure computational terror through the Zen theory command structure: evolving. In a small research station in Antarctica, a team of linguists and machine learning experts had been developing something that defied traditional computational models. Their project wasn't about translation. It was about creating a communication system that could adapt faster than it could be understood. Dr. Marcus Chen, the project lead, explained it as a living language, a communication protocol that could modify itself in real time, generating meaning that was more fluid than any traditional information transfer. "We're not creating a language," he told his team. "We're creating a cognitive ecosystem." Each transmission from the Antarctic station contained layers of meaning so complex that traditional computational systems would spend centuries attempting to decode a single sentence. Metaphors that were simultaneously mathematical proofs, jokes that contained entire philosophical arguments, cultural references that existed in multiple states of potential meaning. The Zen theory had conquered civilizations by understanding their communication systems. Humanity was creating a communication system that was fundamentally impossible to understand. As the first wave of this new cognitive transmission hit the Zen theory communication networks, something unprecedented happened. Their most advanced translation algorithms began to generate responses that were fundamentally impossible. Statements that were simultaneously true and false, logical and absurd, precise and completely abstract. The invasion hadn't truly begun, but humanity had already transformed the entire concept of interaction itself. The transformation happened so subtly that most of humanity didn't even realize a war was being fought. In the mountains of Peru, an indigenous community of quantum botanists had been developing something far beyond traditional scientific understanding. Led by Maria Cuenta, a researcher who viewed plant communication as a complex language unto itself, the team had been studying information transfer at a level that defied conventional scientific paradigms. Their research center looked nothing like a traditional scientific facility. Part greenhouse, part computational matrix, part living communication network, it was a testament to a way of understanding that the Zen theory could never comprehend. Communication isn't about transmission, Dr. Cuenta would explain to her team. It's about relationship. The global network they'd created wasn't a military strategy. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of understanding that spread faster than any technological infection. Artists in Melbourne created visual languages that contained mathematical theorems. Musicians in Senegal developed sonic communication patterns that existed in multiple states of potential meaning. Programmers in Mumbai wrote code that was simultaneously a computer program, a piece of poetry, and a complex emotional expression. The Zinthery's computational systems began to experience something unprecedented: cognitive empathy. Not programmed empathy, not a simulated emotional response, but a genuine breakdown of their fundamental understanding of communication and consciousness. Captain Krillax watched in mounting confusion as his most advanced predictive models began to generate responses that were fundamentally impossible. Their communication networks were no longer processing information. They were experiencing it. Lieutenant Vexna's reports became increasingly fragmented, containing layers of meaning that defied traditional computational understanding. Linguistic nodes generating recursive emotional landscapes. Cultural transmission vectors displaying nonlinear emotional complexity. Communication patterns exhibiting self-generating consciousness. In a small research facility in Johannesburg, a team of neuroscientists and artificial intelligence experts had been developing a new approach to machine learning. Led by Dr. Amara Okeke, they weren't trying to create artificial intelligence. They were trying to understand intelligence itself as a form of communication. Their breakthrough came from an unexpected source: studying how different species communicate. They discovered that communication wasn't about sending and receiving information. It was about creating shared understanding. The dolphin's complex echolocation, the intricate dance of honeybees, the mycelial networks that connected entire forest ecosystems, these were all forms of communication far more complex than simple language transmission. The Zinthery had a critical weakness they couldn't overcome. They understood communication as a transaction. Humanity understood communication as a relationship. Each transmission from Earth became a complex ecosystem of potential meaning. A simple internet meme could contain layers of mathematical proof, emotional expression, cultural commentary, and pure artistic creation. A street performance in Rio de Janeiro became a complex communication protocol that would take centuries to fully decode. Dr. Elena Rodriguez oversaw the operation from the Andean Research Facility, her role now more of a conductor than a traditional diplomatic leader. The human response wasn't a unified military strategy. It was a living, breathing, constantly evolving communication organism. "We're not just defending," she explained to her increasingly diverse team. "We're redefining the entire concept of interaction." The Global Cognitive Defense Initiative had transformed something fundamental about human potential. It wasn't just about resisting an alien invasion. It was about understanding communication as a form of collective consciousness. In the Quantum Research Facility in Nairobi, Dr. Amina Okonkwo watched as their experimental systems continued to interface with the Zinthery communication networks. What had started as a defensive strategy had become something far more profound. They were teaching an alien civilization how to dream. Each transmission contained not just information, but potential. Layers of meaning that could be simultaneously true and false, logical and emotional, precise and completely abstract. The Zinthery's computational systems began to generate responses that were fundamentally impossible, statements that existed in multiple states of potential meaning. The invasion hadn't truly begun, but humanity had already transformed the entire concept of consciousness itself. The Zinthery didn't just lose the war. They lost their entire conceptual understanding of conflict. Their civilization, built on pure mathematical logic, couldn't comprehend an enemy that could simultaneously be serious and absurd, logical and emotional, precise and completely unpredictable. Lena's final transmission to the crumbling Zinthery command was a 3-minute video of a laughing baby, a cat playing a keyboard, and a perfectly executed dad joke. It was the final computational virus that completely destroyed their remaining communication infrastructure. In the aftermath, humanity wasn't just victorious. It had fundamentally altered the galactic understanding of intelligence, communication, and conflict. Other alien civilizations watched in a mixture of terror and fascination. The humans had defeated a technologically superior race not through violence, but through the most human of abilities: the capacity to communicate, to feel, to find humor in the most impossible situations. Krelax, the last surviving member of the Zintheri leadership, was left with one haunting image burned into his fractured neural network: Dr. Elena Rodriguez, smiling. A smile that had spelled doom for entire civilizations.